I think it's fair to say that most of us have been disappointed by the games industry before, whether it be that a promising looking game ended up being nowhere near as good as the marketing was hyping it up to be, a title ends up coming out great but flops on the market due to various external factors outside of its own quality, or the general scummy business practices that can go on behind the scenes. But to me, the worst kind of disappointment is the cancellation. That feeling where you get super excited to see a new release, only to end up being told that it is never coming out and you will never get to play it. And what can make it sting even worse is if the reasoning for its cancellation is some of the stupidest and most illogical reasoning you've ever heard of, making you question not only how anyone could think it was a good idea, but how seemingly no one around them was able to point out how idiotic their decision was. So stick around and try not to lose all your synapses as I showcase a test of frustration made up of some of the stupidest reasons that video games were cancelled. A common story for cancelled games is the closure of the developer and any projects they were working on, which has happened with titles ranging from Star Wars 1313 to Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness 2. However, what if instead of it being down to a studio closure, it was instead down to the game's lead developer having a mental breakdown and cancelling the game out of spite? Case in point, Fez II, the highly anticipated sequel to the 2012 indie game hit, which served as the closing announcement of the Horizon Indie Game press conference at E3 2013. Now, to fully understand this story, you need to know just who exactly the key figure of Fez was, that being one of the game's main designers, Phil Fish, who is catapulted into being one of the most known faces in the indie scene following his appearance in the 2012 documentary Indie Game The Movie. This came with one big asterisk, namely that from the perspective of most people, Phil Fish was kind of a massive dick who became infamous for various inflammatory statements, most famously when during a panel at the Game Developers Conference in 2012, he stated that all modern Japanese games were bad, which was taken as kind of ignorant at best and flat out racist at worst. So suffice to say, he wasn't exactly well liked. The incident in question was initially sparked just 1 month after the game's announcement, when Fish, along with fellow indie developer Jonathan Blow, took to Twitter to complain about the swaths of press trying to ask them questions about Microsoft's then recent decision to backtrack on refusing to let indie developers self-publish games on Xbox One, something that Phil himself had previously complained about due to a lot of indie games like Fez owing their early success to their release on the Xbox 360's digital storefront. This resulted in Phil getting into a spat with games journalist Marcus Beer, who on a Game Trailers podcast called Invisible Walls ranted about the two devs, calling them out for their snarky attitudes, claimed that they want to use the press to promote themselves but won't return the favor, along with calling them such affectionate names as Tosspot and Wanker. This then devolved into an argument between the two on Twitter, with Phil going so far as to request Beer kill himself. The end result, after plenty of pushback from everyone involved and the people watching it happen, being that Phil claimed that he hated the game industry, along with announcing his decision to quit and cancel Fez II, the only game he's been credited on since being Super Hypercube. Years after the fact, in 2023, Phil would engage in an interview where he stated his reasoning for cancelling the game wasn't the spat with Beer, but instead because he wasn't that interested in working on the project in the first place, and had a general desire to get away from being a public figure, with the fight just being an out for him to leave the market he wasn't interested in anymore, finding it an easy decision to make given how early the game was in development. Whether or not you want to believe what he said, I'll let you decide, but it really can't be understated how bizarre the situation must have been to see unfold in real time, and at least prior to us getting to hear Phil's side of the story, stood as the uncontested example of how too much ego can completely destroy a developer's reputation. Whether it's as bad as a documentary cutting between clips of you being sad and your game being made fun of by Soulja Boy, I'll let you decide. In the 2000s to mid-2010s, Capcom was in an era referred to by fans as Crapcom, due to it being a point in time where it seemed like the company just couldn't do anything right. Whether it be westernized reboots that no one asked for and were despised upon reveal, the scummy DLC practices for games like Asura's Wrath and Street Fighter Cross Tekken, or just confusing missteps for some of their biggest series like Resident Evil 6 and Street Fighter V. It being a perception they weren't able to recover from until 2017 with the release of Resident Evil 7. However, one of the biggest things remembered from this time frame was the poor treatment of the company's original golden boy, Mega Man, who went from getting multiple games a year across various series to nothing for years at a time, with some of the new games that did get announced later being cancelled, with easily the most painful and infamous of these cancellations being Mega Man Legends 3. His announcement in 2010 was met with a lot of excitement after Legends 2 ended on a cliffhanger and got no follow-up for a decade. Given the name of the video you're currently watching, I'm pretty sure you can guess what happened, as in July 2011, it was officially announced that the game had been cancelled, and to this day, no attempt has been made by Capcom to try and continue the Legends series. Now, as mentioned earlier, this wasn't the only Mega Man project that got scrapped around this time, some other known ones being a level creator game called Mega Man Universe and Maverick Hunter, a darker reimagining of the X series that was never officially revealed to the public before getting canned, with there being two major events that are considered to be the common links as to why they got cancelled, those being the departure of Keiji Inafune, which left the series with no major executives to champion its continuation, and the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, which was one of the most costliest natural disasters in history, massively affecting Japan's economy and by extension its businesses like Capcom. If those were the only reasons Legends 3 got cancelled, then I wouldn't be talking about it. However, when the cancellation announcement came in, it was stated that it was due to its not meeting a specific requirement, whilst providing no explanation as to what that requirement was. Whilst the American and Japanese parts of Capcom would remain quiet on the subject, the company's European Twitter account would provide some further details. Namely, the decision came down due to a lack of fan engagement. Whilst this statement may be confusing to some, given how much fans have demanded the series continuation, what they were referring to was specifically interactions and traffic to the dev room, a forum which would give constant posts about development updates on the game, along with occasionally holding fan polls for people to vote on or suggest certain design decisions. Long story short, Capcom were using the site to try and gauge how much demand there was for the title. It didn't get the engagement numbers they wanted, and so based on the low traffic, they decided to cancel the game. Now, not only is that a really stupid way of measuring how well a game will do, since the site was likely only being visited by the most hardcore of Mega Man fans, which is not a big audience, but Capcom never communicated this fact to the public, instead only telling them that the game's release would be dependent on the success of a prototype that would release on the 3DS eShop, which never came out due to the game being cancelled before they could release it. Unsurprisingly, fans were absolutely furious that the execs had decided to scrap a game they've been clamoring to get for years because of a metric they weren't told about, with the sting only getting worse as more time passes and Legends continues being ignored. Since the cancellation of Legends 3, the only things done with Mega Man have been an 11th installment in the mainline or classic series, various collections of previous entries, as well as multiple collabs in other Capcom games. So to end this part on somewhat of a positive note, at least Legends fans can look forward to a hypothetical Legends Legacy collection in a year or two. Hopefully. Whilst most people are only really familiar with the Indiana Jones movies, there's been a good handful of original stories for the series told through the form of video games, with titles like The Infernal Machine, Fate of Atlantis, Staff of Kings, and the recently released Great Circle, with the vast majority of the games being made by LucasArts, the video game division of Lucasfilm that existed until 2013, after they were effectively shut down shortly after the Disney buyout. However, one of these games wouldn't get to see the light of day, this being Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix, which started development in 1993 as a follow-up to Fate of Atlantis, being a 2D point-and-click adventure game with the story seeing Indy trying to stop the Nazis shortly after their defeat at the end of World War II, trying to use the Philosopher's Stone to resurrect their deceased comrades. For full transparency, the game's development had already been fairly turbulent, with the sudden departure of one of the game's original co-lead and designers, Joe Pinney, as well as an art style clash between the realistic backgrounds and Art Deco stylized characters. But the final straw, which ultimately caused the game's cancellation, was apparently the team realizing that due to the game's heavy usage of Nazis and their associated imagery and logos, the game would be unable to release in Germany. For anyone unaware, Germany has a law that bans the use of symbols associated with unconstitutional groups or terrorists, which was introduced in the aftermath of World War II primarily to stop the spread of Nazi imagery, with the only exceptions being if its use is for educational, scientific, or artistic purposes. And unlike movies, which are considered to be art by the German government, this meant video games couldn't feature any Nazi imagery in them if they wanted to release in Germany. Now, if you watched my last video, you'd know that Germany is one of the biggest video game markets in Europe, so it's often in the studio's best interest to make sure they can release the game there. So the choice to cancel it kind of makes sense. Until you stop and think about it for a few seconds and question, why not just change the symbols for the German release? Which is a common thing most games with Nazis in them do to get released there, including the previously released adaptation of The Last Crusade, also made by LucasArts, clearly showcasing that this was a problem they were both fully aware of and could have very easily fixed. Luckily, this story does have a slightly happier ending, as whilst the game was cancelled, a 4-part comic tie-in published by Dark Horse did see a release, allowing us to still get the story even if it wasn't in the originally envisioned medium, which they would also end up doing for another cancelled indie game, The Spear of Destiny. As for the previously mentioned law, in 2018, Germany's Video Game Age Rating Board, USK, announced the government would lift the blanket ban, with it now being a case-by-case basis on whether or not a game can include such imagery in the region, allowing games like The Great Circle to be released there completely uncensored. Guess you could say it all came full circle. I'm sorry. Okay, so this last one is more of a stupid reason why a series was cancelled instead of an individual game, but it's so dumb that I couldn't justify not talking about it. Regardless, I'm sure most of the people watching this are familiar with the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games series, a lineup of sports-themed minigame collections starring the mascots that headed one of the biggest rivalries in video game history. The concept coming about after Sega got the video game rights to the 2008 Beijing Olympics and were requested to make something that could appeal to wide audiences, specifically kids, leading to the natural conclusion to make a game starring the Sonic cast, with them later getting the idea and permission to include the Mario cast from Nintendo, feeling that former console rivals made perfect sense for the friendly competitive nature of the Olympics. Now, the series lasted until the Tokyo Olympics that were originally scheduled for 2020, with many being surprised when the news came in that we weren't getting one for the Paris 2024 games, especially when we learnt why the IOC decided to end their partnership with Sega, with the decision basically boiling down to that they felt they could get more promotion from esports and NFTs. No, you did not mishear me. The IOC legitimately felt that a sports field that is famously difficult to get a foot in the door in and even harder to actually make any money from, and a market that completely collapsed after becoming a synonym for scam, were both better business ventures than being promoted by two of the biggest video game franchises on the planet. The end result was that instead of getting another Mario and Sonic game, we got Olympics Go! Paris 2024, a free-to-play mobile game I'm fully confident in saying no one watching this has ever heard of, which was also tied in with a line of NFTs, along with the first Olympic esports games currently being scheduled for 2027 in Saudi Arabia. Suffice to say, most people would agree this was not an adequate substitute, especially when none of those things seem to be able to do what the Mario and Sonic games could so well, that being to actually get the attention of people who normally wouldn't give a remote crap about the Olympics. Meanwhile, these projects either seem to appeal to no one, or an incredibly niche market that will most likely be nowhere close to the numbers of people they were bringing in before by working with the Red Plumber and Blue Hedgehog, meaning they sunk a completely fine business venture for literally no reason. I think we'll end things here for now, but just keep in mind that whenever a game studio makes a stupid mistake, just remember that it could always be worse. At least they're not Olympic committee levels of stupid. Most of the time.